Hey guys, Arden Ballard, physician assistant, athletic trainer, and your host at Whiskey Throttle Media's Crash Cart. Today, I have a wonderful interview with Eddie Casillas. Eddie Casillas is an athletic trainer, a certified strength and conditioning specialist. He's also a very good friend of mine. Without him, I don't think I would be in the motocross industry from a healthcare standpoint. Um, I was very fortunate to start working with Asterisk and Alpine Star Mobile Medical Unit back in 2005 when I met Dr. Bodner. And Eddie kind of took me under his wing and helped me navigate the industry. So I owe a lot to him. I realized I didn't really formally introduce him when I interviewed him a couple of days ago, so I wanted to take the time and do it the right way. Enjoy the interview. We talk about a lot. Talk about how he got started in athletic training and in the motocross industry, and then we also um, talk about some of our experiences within the mobile medical unit and talk about working with our favorite racers. Stay tuned. Now we're all right. We're live, folks.
We're live. Live.
Guys, this is
Like,
Arden Ballard, physician assistant, athletic trainer, coming to you with another edition of Whiskey Throttle's Crash Cart. I have the one, the only Eddie Casillas with me today. He is a athletic trainer. He is a strength and conditioning specialist, an all-around badass dude, and a personal friend of mine. Eddie,
welcome.
welcome,
Glad
man.
glad to see you. This is a cool, even if it's just you and me rapping out and no one else is listening, I'm stoked. But I'm
All
hoping that's not the case.
all 6 people who listen to this will be thrilled with the conversation.
I hope so. I hope it's worth their time, whether they're cooking dinner or in the shop, working on bikes. I hope that they get something out of it, some enjoyment or something, and brings a little smile to their face. So yeah,
Same here,
stoked
man.
to be here.
So, speaking of these half dozen folks, why don't you give them a little bit of your background and relevancy and all that good stuff?
Awesome. Yeah. Shoot, where do I start from, like, birth, or do we just kind of forward a few years and just kind of maybe a little background to how I got to where I am now?
Hey, if you want to start from conception, man, that's fine. I got all day.
uh,
Maybe a
yeah.
little moto
So
specific stuff.
yeah. So um, let's start from the beginning. I get, for context, right? So third grade, my friend Kenny and I went out riding BMX bikes like most kids in those days do, right? It's a mode of transportation and a mode of seeking out jumps and whatnot. And so him and I were trying to find this sick riding spot. Like, I think anybody that's in this industry or listens to this podcast has a similar story, right? When you're younger, whether it's on a skateboard or a BMX bike, you were chasing the spot, right?
Yep.
There was a local spot where the kids hung out and they jumped, and whatever it was, ramps or dirt, it could be anything. And so we were looking for that spot that the kids at school were talking about, and we happened to find it. And in trying to get to that spot, he rode down a hill, crashed, knocked his teeth out, and so I was like, wow, this is pretty crazy. We're in third grade, and my friend just knocked his teeth out. So I kind of rode down to where he was at. He was freaking out, and I was like, well, I got to get some help. That's kind of what my mind frame was like. So I took off, started looking for an adult, and ran across a house where I saw a garage that was open, looked inside, and I seen a dirt bike. I'm like, yeah, that guy could relate. So I went and banged on the door, and the lady opened the door, and I told her what happened. So I'm assuming it was her husband, got on the dirt bike, went up there to try to get my friend. He was not having it. He's like, I'm not getting on the back of that thing. So they called the ambulance. Ambulance showed up. He got hauled away. And I was able to ride back to my house, which wasn't too far away, and told my parents what happened. And they went to the hospital with my friend's parents. And at the hospital, talking to the docs and the nurse, they came out, and I was telling them what happened and everything. And it was the doctor that was like talking to me, and he's like, man, you're really calm. You're pretty relaxed. You're not freaking out. And yeah, you were really, you're a big help, getting your friend some attention and getting him here to the hospital. They said the typical, probably saved his life kind of thing. But I was really stoked that he was pumping me up. And And at the time, it was really weird because there's an adrenaline rush to that, right?
Hmm.
And I didn't know what that was at the time. I just knew that it felt cool to be able to help somebody in need, and somebody was like, "Yeah, this you did a great job." Like those feelings I had were something that stayed with me and very impactful. And then the doctor's like, "Yeah, you could be a paramedic. This is
Yeah.
something you can get a job in." And I was like, "Really? Like I could do something and have these feelings and get paid for it?" And I was like, "Yeah." So from then on, I didn't know what that job really was. I mean, he mentioned paramedic and stuff, and or nurse, but that feeling of being able to help somebody, and get kind of, and I hate to use the adrenaline, the rush, because obviously somebody's hurt, but it felt good, right? It felt good to help somebody in need. And so I pursued whatever job that was going to be. And all the way through high school, the counselor there said, "Hey, that sounds like physical therapy." So I was
Right.
like, "Oh, I guess that's where I'm going to end up," because at my school they didn't have athletic trainers.
Hmm.
So she mentioned physical therapy. I took a little different path. I went into the military. I went into the Army, and they put me into the combat medic program. So in that program is where I kind of got my foundation for medicine, right? For what I was to do later on down the road. So I went in, did my time in the military as a medic, and gained a lot of experience, a lot of um, core experience that would later play a big role in me doing the job that I was doing in the motocross industry. So got through the military, got out with the idea of going into physical therapy field.
Hmm.
So at that time, you needed to get some hours both in the hospital and in an outpatient clinic, right? So
Right.
I started pursuing that. Ended up working for an awesome clinic in town. At the time, healthcare has changed so much since then, but at that time, the techs, or the aides as they called them, they gave them a lot of leeway with patient care. So if you can imagine, working with a therapist and him just basically saying, "All right, I mean, you have some skills from the military, so put those to use here. I want you to take some measurements." They showed me, goniometry measurements. They showed me how to do range of motion. They showed me how to do some testing and basic stuff, right? That they just let me do. And they showed me how to use the modalities, the ultrasound, the stim units, and how to use them, when to use them. And it was an awesome experience that I'm very thankful for. That I know nowadays, students don't get that. A lot of
No.
kids going into a PT clinic, it's like, "Hey, you can get some towels, go wash, some laundry," but you're not getting that hands on. And that was also building on that foundation. Okay.
Yeah.
I got into a really good group of people there working, and I tried getting into PT school, and even to this day, it's a very difficult program to get into. And I wasn't successful, and so I was kind of getting a little bummed out. And there was a coworker that was working with me, and she was an athletic trainer, and she's like, "Have you ever thought about athletic training?" And I was like, "I don't even know what that is."
Right.
So she described it to me, and I'm like, "Where was that? In high school? Like, what am I doing?"
Exactly.
I was like, "That sounds exactly what I want to do." And for those of you that don't know what athletic training is, it's excuse me, it's a healthcare profession. All right. So if you watch pro sports and you see guys get injured, and there's a group of people that go out onto the field, those are athletic trainers. Oftentimes you'll have a doctor out there, but for the core group of people out there, those are athletic trainers.
Kind of like
Um,
this guy.
yeah,
Yeah.
kind of like that guy, the guy on the left, not the guy on the right.
There we go.
Um,
Yeah, this guy right there.
so yeah. So you go out there, and you assess the situation. You bring him back to the sideline. You take care of him, and you decide right there, hey, is this guy going back out on the field, or is he going to go into the locker room and get taken care of there? And then after the game, you're doing your rehab, and you're doing whatever it takes to get that athlete back onto the field. So I was like, that's what I want. So I pursued that. I went to UNLV, University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and got my education there. And it was awesome. It was a great experience. at that time, it was, it was kind of, I don't want to say it was a Wild West, but there was still trying to decide, do we do clinical hours? Do we do internship type route? So it was in that kind of mode at that time for that profession. So it was a mixture of both. So we're getting a lot of exposure, and my professors, being that had already been in the military and being a little bit older than most of the students there, they kind of gave me a lot of autonomy. They assigned me a tennis team, for example, and they said, hey, this is your team. See you later at the end of the semester. You go do what you got to do, and then check in when you have to. So it was awesome.
Isn't that great?
It was great, right? The coach even said, hey, you're the guy for medical stuff, so my team will listen to you. And it was a good thing for me, because I was able to work with athletes, right, and understand athletes. And even to the coach was really cool. He really mentored me a lot in the understanding of the athlete's mentality of wanting to play while hurt or preparing to play, so that was a great experience. My I guess our counselor, the person that you connect with at school that kind of guides you through your career there, Dr. Mangus, he was also great. He hooked me up working some camps for U.S. soccer, their national team program. They had an Olympic development program, so I got some exposure there, and then that also raised the level of athleticism, right? So I'm working with collegiate athletes. I'm working with top club, future national team players in soccer. So getting exposure to that program and just understanding, the difference between a recreation player, right, athlete, and the athlete that is going to maybe have scholarship or, future professional positions, and getting an understanding of communicating with the athlete and understanding them and their needs, right? And getting exposed to athletes where they're playing injured, right? And you're developing this rapport with them. And so that when you're saying, hey, you shouldn't play, their understanding is, okay, this guy's been with me. He understands I want to do this. And if he's saying no, then I shouldn't play. Right. And that's very important. And it takes some time to develop that. And so I was able to learn and communicate and be able to get that relationship with those athletes. And that also building on that foundation for the future. Graduating college, went back to work for that clinic that I was at, that PT clinic. And that's where that's right there. That moment is where it happened. I had these patients that I was seeing. This is really funny. The lady that worked at the front office, she knew that I liked BMX and snowboarding and skateboarding. I was kind of like the reckless kid. Right. And so then she's like, hey, I got these guys for you. Okay. They always call in for therapy, and they're here for like a day or two, and then they're gone. They disappear. We don't see them again. And then they come back and they're still broken. And sure enough, I get a patient come in, Eric Kehoe. If you're familiar with Eric Kehoe, team manager for Honda. At the time that I met him, he was the manager over at Yamaha Troy. And I knew moto. I knew it from the Coliseum. I knew it from watching TV. But I didn't ride dirt bikes like I ride BMX or snowboard, right? I've been on a dirt bike and how to ride, but I was not in that industry. So I didn't really know. So I know Eric Kehoe other than he was just the guy that rode dirt bikes, right? Mm-hmm. And he comes in, and I think I was seeing him for his back or his knee or something. And we're talking, we're having this conversation, and he's like, so, what do we got to do? And I'm like, well, you can ride. And he's like, I can ride? And I was like, yeah, I don't see why not. You like riding? Why would I take that away from you? And he's like, you're the first person that has said that, right? And I was like, well, yeah, why wouldn't you ride? So anyways, he was stoked. He was really stoked that I would say that. And I was like, well, here's the deal. I want you to ride, but you got to remember that you're still injured. So you got to taper it down a little bit, right? Just go feel it out, gradually get back into it. And let's see where we go from there. I go, why don't you go and just maybe ride at half the speed, right? I don't know. I don't understand moto. So you help me out. Let me understand what you need. And he helped me out. He's like, well, this is what we do. This is how many laps I ride. This is what I'm normally doing. I'm like, all right, cool. Let's go at 75%. Yep. So he was stoked. So then he came back and he consistently came back, and we got better, and he sent other people. He's like, hey, go to this guy. This guy, he's not going to tell you to stop riding.
Right.
He's actually going to tell you to go
What a
ride.
concept.
Right. And so it was, oh, sorry. So anyways, he was cool. He was cool with that. And so he sent other guys to me. Rob Healy was another one. He was the owner of InStyle. If anybody knows Rob Healy at InStyle,
Yeah.
They made graphics. And then Bob Rathkamp, he was another gentleman. He's the guy that was over at Cinesalo. He ran Cinesalo and now in Garnet. And they were coming in for therapy. And the front office is like, what's your trick? Like, what's the magic? And I was like, well, and hey, look, anybody that rides dirt bikes, you guys will totally understand this. I was like, well, they like the sport. They're not going to not do it, right? They're going to do it. So I'm going to tell them, yeah, do it, but throttle it down. Just like a doctor would tell a football player, you can play, just, let's work within these parameters. Right.
Right.
And so that's the trick, right? I'm not going to take that away from them. Now, if I tell them they shouldn't, then it's probably they shouldn't, right? They shouldn't ride. So, and they understood that. If I say, hey, listen, maybe not ride for 2 weeks, let this really heal up so that you can ride longer, right? If you don't let it heal for these 2 weeks, you might end up, prolonging how long this injury lasts. And they were, okay, cool. You let me ride the last 3 times we were here. I'll listen to you. So that was kind of my start in there.
Well, it helps that we're trained as athletic trainers. We're trained in prevention of injury. So, I mean, we kind of know that dance between inactivity versus you can keep it going. And
exactly. And they were very appreciative of that, because that was the first time that someone had ever told them, go ahead. Like, they kept constant, everywhere they went was like, no, you shouldn't do that. Shouldn't ride dirt bikes. That's so dangerous, so yeah, they would come and go. They all lived in that area. I built a good rapport with them. And really where my break came was at the time, Kehoe had some athletes that he was working with, on that team. And he was like, hey, how would you like to come out to, a race or two and just be there for the athletes? Because we had talked about, that concept, other athlete or other sports teams do that. So he was fully cool with that. And I was like, yeah, that's cool. And at the time there was another gentleman, Russ Wageman. He owned a shop, Pit Pro, and he had an amateur team. Chris Wheeler was on it. And he's the one that really said, okay, I'll open the door for you. I'll get you in. You can come and work out of my van, out of our box van, and work with the athletes. And I was like, all right, cool. And so I remember it was the Coliseum, and we were there for a Supercross event, and he was there, and he had a box van. And not only did he have guys pitting out of his box van, but he was also selling stuff. Okay. He was selling stuff out of his box van. And I was all stoked. I'm there, I was professional. I had my little, my collared shirt, and I was like ready to, to work. Right. And so I'm sticking around, and these guys are doing their practice, and someone comes up to me.
Hold up. Were you in the athletic trainer khakis?
No, absolutely not. I had to wear them in college. That was just such a, but no, after college, I was no longer in a khaki. No, absolutely.
For those that don't know, athletic trainers are notoriously criticized because they're in like these stiff polo shirts and these tight little khaki shorts. But anyway.
Yeah, no. And that was not, no. But yeah, so I remember there was this young lady comes up. She's pushing this dirt bike, and she sets it up against the box van, and she's coming over. And look, I'm the only one at the box van. Everybody else is doing their thing. So she shows up, and she's like, hey, I need 10 gallons of VP fuel, and I'm looking for like a 52 sprocket or something. And I was like, a what? And she's like, yeah, can you get that for me? And I was like, yeah, let me figure this out. And she's like, here, let me get it. So she hops in the box van, and she's like over at the fuel can, and she's pumping the fuel into the fuel can, and she's looking for all the gear. And then the guys show back up, and I'm like, hey, she's looking for fuel and a sprocket. I don't know. And they just started laughing. They're like, okay, this guy, he's our athletic trainer. He's not a mechanic. He's not a moto guy. So everybody had a good laugh over that. But then again, that was my entry, and then Russ Wageman got me that gig, and then Kehoe then helped me out, by covering my costs to get in to work with the Yamaha Troy guys, and just getting in there and being available if they needed some taping or just stretching or anything, that you would be able to provide during the course of the day that would help them get through that event. And then it wasn't until Casey Lytle started riding for that team that really, working with him was the catalyst for me eventually making a push to go to Temecula and start my path in that industry. Casey had injured his back, and he had been seeing some other people for some care, wasn't getting any better. And finally, when he came to me, and we discussed maybe getting an MRI, seeing an orthopedic. He hadn't been to an orthopedic at this time, did an MRI, and he had some bulging discs, right? And it was bulged enough to where he was getting symptoms, right? He was getting some symptoms down into his legs, some numbness, some tingling and stuff that was affecting his riding. And so they were thinking, man, this is it. His season's over. And I said, no, that's not necessarily true. If we can do some exercises, we can alleviate some of those symptoms, and I don't see why he can't ride. And they're like, okay, well, let's do it. And this is where, having worked with the tennis team and working with the soccer team and communicating with coaches and understanding kind of the verbiage that coaches want to hear, right? They don't want to hear, hey, my guy's out, because if he's out, he's got to be out, right? And my verbiage was like, no, I think he can still race. The doctor thinks he can race. We just got to, we got to get this under control, right? We got to do the proper exercise. So that's when I sat him down and said, look, we have to at least take a week or two to see if we can get these symptoms to go down. No riding. And so they had an off weekend. And so Kehoe's like, all right, well, we have an off weekend. So that's 2 weeks. And I said, we'll just see. Maybe he has to miss one race, and he's like, all right, well, let's play it by ear. I'm like, all right, let's do that. So we just started working. He was coming in every day, and we were doing his rehab, and he was getting better. And I was towards the end of the second week, and he wasn't supposed to ride, right? We were going to make a decision, kind of like a game day decision, as to whether or not he was going to go ride or race. And he someone had come in, because they were also a patient, and they're like, hey man, I don't know what you guys are doing with Lytle, but that dude is ripping. Like, I can't believe he's riding. And I was like, what? And they're like, yeah, he was out at the track and he was just crushing. He was feeling great. I was like, all right, cool. So Casey comes in at his appointment, and I'm like, hey, how was the day? He's like, oh, it was good. I'm going to get started on exercises. I'm like, how's everything going? He's like, yeah, I'm feeling really good. I'm like, yeah, so how was riding? And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, yeah, I heard you were ripping. And he's like, no. I'm like, don't lie to me. Right. He's like, all right, you got me. And I'm like, dude, you can't be doing that, and you can hurt yourself and really, now you're out for the season. So we held off one race just to make sure everything was really good, but he raced that following weekend. And at that time is when Kehoe's like, hey, listen, you might have a job in this industry. Okay. I think you have what it takes. I don't know what that looks like. I'd like to help you out, by getting you to some races and stuff like that. But I think, there are other people similar to you. There's chiropractors, and there's like nutritionists that come to the races and they help the riders out. But if you want to do this, I'll try to help you out. So I was like, all right, let's do it. And there was a rider, Justin Buckaloo. He was coming on board to the team, and we actually started working together. So that's where the first time I was doing my strength conditioning stuff, right? Buckley was injured, and we were doing some rehab, and then I ended up doing a little bit of training with him, and I was going down to Temecula, and I pulled the trigger, and I ended up moving in with him and his mechanic, Zach White. And that was my start in moto, right? Like, I was like full on. I quit my job. I had some savings for a house, which, I look back at it now, I should have bought the house and maybe, did something else, to get some money. But I was using that money to get my future going. And so I was working with Justin. I was getting my feet wet in this industry, and we almost won a championship. We worked together for part of the season. The first year he was on the team, we went into a solid off-season program, and I was still learning moto, right? I was still learning, what type of conditioning is required, what kind of mechanics they're using, on the bike, like just studying the sport, trying to learn as much as I can, talking to as many people as I could, trying to get some feedback. Because again, my experience on a dirt bike isn't like what their experience, right? So I don't ride at their speed. So I had to really ask a lot of questions and take in a lot of feedback. And I remember at the time, saying, hey, we should do some strength training. We got to do some squats and deadlifts, what other athletes do. And I knew that was important. And they're like, nope, not doing any of that, because that's going to make me heavy or I'm going to get pumped up. And so that was my introduction to like arm pump and stuff. And I was like, that doesn't make sense, because, even sprinters squat and do this kind of stuff, and, their calves don't get pumped up, kind of stuff. So I was trying to understand that, but then I was like, all right, cool. I'm just not going to tell them to do it, because if I do that, they're going to fight me. And then, I'm not going to get what I want out of it, and they're not going to get what they need out of it. So I was like, all right, cool. Well, all right, let's do these things. And so as we worked along, through the season and stuff, and they got injured, right, or something happened, then I would just kind of throw it in there like, hey, if you were a little bit stronger, that might not have happened, or you could have rebounded a little better, right? That slam to the ground wouldn't have affected you as much. So I just kind of planting the seed. So then the off season would come, and they were more accepting of maybe doing a little bit of strength training, maybe for 2 weeks after the season, just to get some. And that's how we started, just slowly chipping away at that. And that was pretty cool. We almost won a championship. The one year he actually won the first few races. And I was looking pretty good. I'm like, dude, I'm going to win a championship here, I think, with this guy, and we went into the break. What's that?
1 for 1, right?
Yeah, right. I was stoked. I mean, I'm like, wow, it's my second year in this sport, and I'm working with this great kid, and we go into the break, and I remember I was sleeping on his couch, helping him out, going to the track in the morning, just pretty much 24/7 with this guy and his mechanic, right? He was working, in the shop, how mechanics do, just constant work, right? No rest. And I was digging it though. I was like, if this is what it takes, I'm stoked, right?
Yeah.
And I wasn't charging him very much, because I didn't know what to charge him as a business person at that time. I didn't know.
Yeah.
Right. So I was like, well, he's letting me sleep on his couch. And so that accounts for something. And so I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was like a few $100 a month is what I was getting paid. Right? And he was like on a bonus only program too. And so he was telling me, you're on my couch, pay you this much. I'm like, oh, that'll work, And so, like I said, it's probably a few $100 a month. We go into the break. He's looking really good for this championship. He just has to stay on the podium. And even Kehoe and all the guys are really stoked, because, they expect those other riders, but sometimes in reality, they're like, this might be, 2 or 3 season deal before we really see this person blossom. But he was coming around. He was doing really good. And I remember him sitting me down on the couch, and he's, at this time, I want to say he was like 18 years old, or maybe a little bit younger, maybe like 17. And he's like, hey, we got to talk. I'm like, yeah, sure. No problem. He's like, I've been doing some thinking. And I was like, all right, here, dude, I'm going to get a raise. I'm just going to be, he's going to be stoked. And he's like, yeah, I'm going to have to let you go. And I was like, all right, like, what's the deal? And he's like, yeah, I just think that you're just charging me too much, And I was like, oh, really? I was like, okay. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what trainers are getting paid, or athletic trainers, strength coaches. I said, all right, let me think about this. And, maybe I'd take a pay cut. I don't know. So I went and called all the local gyms in town, 24-Hour Fitness. What's the other ones that were out there at the time? But anyway, I called them up and I said, hey, what's the cost for personal training? Like, what do you guys charge? And they're telling me, oh, we're looking at $25 an hour, or, this would equate to about $25 an hour. Right.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, cool. So I just started doing the math, and I'm like, I'm with this guy at least 8 to 10 hours a day, right? Mm-hmm. At the track, doing lap times, all this kind of stuff, 10 hours. Let's just say I'm at the track, and I'm like, you're giving me like $400 a month. So I broke it down to an hourly rate, and it was like 15 cents an hour. And I put it on the paper, and I was like,
"You greedy
man,
bastard, Eddie."
I was like,
I can't believe you.
I was like, that doesn't make sense. Like, I know that's not even, that's not right. So I said to him, I go, hey, look, if you think that you're charging me too much, I understand that's you, but these are the numbers. This is what a personal trainer gets paid at a 24-hour fitness. I'm way better than that. But yeah, if we want to part ways, I get it. So we parted ways. And I told
Mid-season.
Kehoe, and Kehoe was like, he's making a mistake. Why would he do that? And even he said, the dude's getting bonuses for his wins. Like he could pay your salary. That's what happens, right?
Yeah.
And so no, I was like, all right, I'm out. And so we parted ways, and he didn't win that championship that year. He and I'm not saying it was my doing, right? But he did come back probably like 10 or 12 years later. He's like, yeah, that was probably one of my biggest mistakes in my career. I got ahead of myself, and I was just thinking about, the celebration stuff. I wasn't sticking to what was working, and obviously it didn't work. And there's some other issues there. It wasn't me that was like making his success. But that's fine. That's cool. I ended up moving in with Ernesto at his house, and I stayed there for a while. Him and Kenny G, and I got introduced to other guys. Started working with Casey Johnson, and then working with Casey Johnson, with Jerry Dostal, and then Ivan Tedesco, and it just kind of started moving from there. And right around that time, there was this talk of a motocross like sports medicine truck being formed.
Yep.
It was a guy named Al Gerke. He was a personal trainer for Ron, and he said that he had talked to some individuals that were considering putting this together. And I was like, well, I need to talk to these guys.
Yeah,
I want to see what's going on. And so he introduced me to Dr. Bodner and Dr. Augustine and Tom Carson. And I was one of the Anaheims, and I was like, hey, I introduced myself. I told him what I was doing. And he's like, yeah. And it was actually Dr. Augustine, because he's an orthopedic. He understood the value of athletic trainers, and he had that slot. He said, hey, we got to have athletic trainers. And, Dr. Bonner's like, well, we need nurses, and we need, paramedics and this kind of stuff. He's like, no, you're going to be a lot better off having athletic trainers. So Dr. Augustine really pushed for that. If he wasn't involved, there wouldn't be any athletic trainers in the medic rig.
Yeah.
So he was really behind the athletic trainers. And I owe him a lot for at least, making sure that happened. And so I told him, and Dr. Bonner's like, yeah, put in your application, and we'll see what happens. And I was like, okay. I go, I can't imagine there's that many people, that are going to have the experience,
Right.
But I'm like, hey, whatever, I'll do it. So I put my resume together and stuff, and I gave it to him, and I just sat around for a while. And then I was like, dude, I can't imagine. What's the deal? Why haven't they called me back? And I mean, it was probably a month and a half going by, 2 months. I was like, dude, this sucks. So then someone told me that he was considering getting a massage therapist instead.
Lord.
And I was like, no, this can't be right. There's no way.
Right.
So I confronted him. Like, I don't know, maybe I was really thorny. I was really salty. I was really pissed off that they would hire a massage therapist over an athletic trainer, or screw a paramedic, whatever.
Right.
So I went to him, and I was like, hey, I go, look, no disrespect, but I think what you're doing is stupid. I'm like, you serious? You're going to hire a massage therapist? I mean, people were telling me, and he's like, hey, you need to calm down. He's like, you're hired, dude. You were the guy from the beginning, but there's massage therapists dropping in their resumes, and they're trying to give me massages to try to get a job here. You think I'm going to turn that down? He's like, you know how many massages I got in the past 3 months? I'm like, well, why didn't you say that? I don't care. Go get your massage. But did you leave me hanging like that? And we were laughing. He's like, nah, dude, you're the guy from the beginning. I'm like, well, let's make it, let's make it legit, right? Just tell me. So he's like, yeah, you're good. We want you on the team. So that's where that started. I was on there as me, Dr. Bodner, Dr. Augustine, and then the nurses.
I found
the nurses were in there. Yes, even like Dr. Ryman and Dr. Alexander, they were coming around a little bit.
Yep.
That's when I got to know them those first couple of years there, and then they started coming on board a little bit more often to the races. So
Yep.
But yeah, that was the beginning. That we had a little fifth wheel trailer back then, like a snowmobile trailer kind of thing that we towed it around for a while. It was perfect. Like I was living the dream for me, right?
Yep.
Most athletic trainers, as you know, when they go into the collegiate setting, their dreams are to work baseball, football, hockey, those sports, right?
Yep.
And I had an opportunity to maybe doing some stuff with soccer, but when this came around, I'm like, let's do it. That this is my action sports, right? I'm all about it. So yeah, I was living the dream when I finally got that gig.
Eddie, this was what, 2004, 03,
Yeah,
something like that?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I moved down to Temecula in '99, 2000, right there. So yeah, 2001, 2002 is when this stuff was kind of coming around. Yeah, I think it was 2004 when officially they had this team and said, "Yep, we're going to launch it." Boom, we started out. I think it was like San Diego, well, Anaheim. We had a regular trailer, but I think it was San Diego when we demonstrated, or we brought out the full rig. Yeah,
I remember. So yeah, and I met Bodner first in 05 in Houston when I slept in my car and made sure that I harassed him enough so I can get a job, and then we met that weekend. And
yeah, well, was that, or he when did you drive down with us? Did you? Because I didn't meet you until we communicated. We had an email, right? I think we had an email back then, right? You still had email. I think when it was available.
Yep.
But I remember Bodner's like, "Hey, dude, this guy's been on my ass, just nonstop." Yep. He's like, "Do you think we can, can you come out and hang out for a little bit?" I'm like, "Yeah." I was a big proponent of that. Like going through school, being an undergrad, I remember the graduate students that were just like, "You guys aren't worthy of stepping on the field," and it's like, okay, I get it. And then even in like the athletic training room, it's like, "No, don't touch the equipment, whatever." Not on the athletes. You can do it on yourselves, but you're not good enough for the athletes.
Right.
And I'm like, that's crap. I mean, we're supposed to be learning, so let's learn, on athletes. That's what we're here for. So I was like, you know what? If a student wants to go through the effort, like you did, right, to come out, I'm going to give this person every opportunity to come out here and let them experience it, right? So yeah, we connected, and I'm like, hey, I'm out in Mississippi, hanging out with Wyndham. If you want to come down to the races, let's do it. And I remember I was with Tucker. I was working with Tucker Hibbert, yep. And I told Tucker, I'm like, if this dude is willing to drive from, were you in Louisiana or where were you at that time?
Yeah, I was in New Orleans.
In New Orleans, I'm like, if this dude's willing to drive all the way out here to catch a ride with us and drive 6 hours to Houston or whatever.
Yep.
This dude's got to be legit. I mean, people that don't want the job aren't going to do that. They're not going to go through that effort. So I'm like, let's let him go. And Tucker's like, yeah, if he's here on time, then he's in. And so, yeah, I remember you showed up in your little Toyota truck.
Yep.
And I remember it was just so funny because, oh man, I know you remember, what's coming.
I did know
you got all your stuff out of the truck. I'm like, hey,
it's all coming.
I'm like, hey, let's go, dude. We're gonna hop in the van. We're taking off. And you're like, all right, cool. And we went to get gas, and Tucker says to me, he's like, hey, who is this guy? I'm like, I don't know. I go, I just know him from email. He's an athletic trainer. He's on for Mo. He's like, bro, he's got pom poms on his backpack. he's got like teddy bears, And I was like, okay, yeah, that's kind of weird. He's like, we need to find out who we're riding with before we go on this trip.
Right.
And so remember you came in and we're like, hey, what's with the pom poms and the little teddy bear and stuff? And you're like, hey, dude, I was a cheerleader. Like it was like nonchalant. I'm a cheerleader. And so Tucker and I are like, okay, what do we do? Do we kick this guy out? What are we rolling with? And then we just started laughing, and we're like, all right, cool. I guess we got a cheerleader in the van, so let's roll,
I mean, and now that it was out in the open.
Yeah, and then and that's all she wrote. Like, it was legit. You came in, I showed you around, and yeah, you were great, and you just kept coming, and I was like, yeah, if you want to come out more, do it, and that led to other things. So that was pretty cool. It was really good.
Beautiful run. Man.
I was stoked that you made that effort because that's how I was, right? I went through the effort, and I even, like I said, I even called Bodner out, like, dude, I want this job. So I appreciate that effort. So other people had emailed me before, and I'm like, all right. So I would say, show up at this time. And if they did, I knew they were ready to go out and experience being with an athletic trainer, at a Supercross race. Some people wouldn't answer back, or I'm like, hey, yeah, you got to come out. And they're like, well, are you going to pay me? I'm like, are you serious? You're calling me, no, I'm not going to pay you. I'm like, I'll give you a box lunch, but that's about it.
Right.
They're like, nah, I'm not interested. So
I didn't know you. I didn't know Bodner. I mean, I'm just a South Louisiana kid who loves motocross, who happened to be a cheerleader, but I also love motocross. And I saw Bodner or you on TV one day, just like a glimpse. And I was like, oh man, like this actually exists, because I was in athletic training school at the time with no intention working ball and stick sport. And I wanted to be you. I wanted to be Bodner. And that's all I wanted to do. My plan was to graduate and then move to California and just, work at a shop until I met somebody. And I emailed my local AMA rep, who got me in touch with higher ups at AMA who happened to know Bodner's email address. And I just stalked the living shit out of him until he gave me an opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds weird, right? Like that when you say it like that, like Stockton, but that's what it takes, right? Like privateers do that, right? They're mechanics, like young mechanics. They're like, I'm going to go hang out at a shop until I annoy the crap out of somebody. And they say, just go to the track with this guy, spin wrenches, right?
Yep.
Most of the time, I'm going to say the majority of the time, maybe that doesn't work out, but you got to do it, right? And for those that it does work out for, because they obviously have something to contribute, right? They're not just there to be there. Like some people there, they're chasing the stardom. But the core people, the guys that do it for the love of it and for wanting to contribute something, they stick around. And that's why you stuck around, right? You had something to give that the industry needed, and it was awesome. And I'm glad you stuck it out. So that was good.
Thanks, man. It's a huge blessing. And my life wouldn't be the same if it weren't for working in the industry the way I have. It's been amazing. And I would do it all over again. So I know you would too.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. Absolutely.
Let's talk about some moto specific stuff real quick. Tell me, and tell these other 6 people who are listening, some of the gnarliest stuff that you've seen from your perspective, either trackside or at a practice track, or what's some good stories that come to mind? It doesn't have to be gruesome, but it can be just funny.
Well, it's I'll put it to you this way. So my cousin Danny, he was he went into the athletic training program, and he was still in school. And I remember telling him, we were at a family function. I'm like, hey, dude, you're in town for a while. Why don't you? We were starting the season, so we had Anaheims and San Diego's, and we've had Phoenix. I'm like, you come to like 4 races, okay? You come hang out with me for 4 races, and you will see all the injuries that your teachers tell you will never see in your lifetime, because they're so like uncommon, right? They just don't happen. This is like fluke and stuff like that. And I was telling him about like Travis Pastrana's injury, where he separated his spine from his sacrum, right, or his pelvis, and he lived, right. It's like he was saying how the doctor was telling him, I've only seen like 3 cases or 4 cases of this ever, and they all were paralyzed, and he walks away, right. And I was telling my cousin, like, you come to 4 races, and not that I want those things to happen, but that's just the nature of the sport, right. And sure enough, he came to 4 of them, and I mean, he saw fractured femurs, fractured pelvis, the common fractures, dislocations, and ran the whole gamut of that. And unfortunately too, he also experienced, a death. Jason Carletta was the young rider that passed away at that Supercross in San Diego. But through that tragedy, for him to see that, it sticks with you, right, for the rest of your life. But he also got to see, everything that goes behind the scenes, so that doesn't happen again, right? And, through a tragedy like that, you want to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And so he was able, we talked a lot. There's some emotional stuff that goes along with that, but I think too, as a healthcare provider, to see what we do behind the scenes so that doesn't happen again. He was able to see that too, and going back to school, and then the job that he's done since then, in the athletic training field, you're able to say, hey, look, we got to put these measures in place so stuff, this inevitable, or this tragedy doesn't happen. And people can say, well, it's not going to happen. He's like, no, it can happen. All right.
Yeah.
If we, let our guard down a little bit, it can happen. And so I think that's from a tragedy comes that. And I think that, is good in that respect. But as far as injuries, gosh, I'll tell you, not an injury, but it's just really funny in the sense that I'm the butt of this joke or this situation. But I think it was I say it was Glenn Helen. Was it Glenn Helen? Carmichael was racing, and I think all our listeners, they understand what monkey butt is, right? We've all experienced it. If you ride in the sand and you're riding dirt bikes, your butt gets a little raw. Well, in this situation, it got pretty raw, and his whole crew came into the truck to see if there was something that we can do, right? And we're having this conversation, and he's like, "Yeah, dude, I got a bad case of monkey butt, and I mean, it's really bad." And so we're like, "Yeah, we got to look, we got to take a peek, and see how bad it is."
Right.
So he's like, "All right, whatever." And so he's like, he drops his drawers, and I'm like down there, like he's like bent over on the gurney, right? And I'm like looking at, he's like spreading his butt cheeks open, and I'm looking, and all I see is the photographers, I don't know if it was Guybee or Cox or somebody, are shooting pictures from the opposite end. So all you see is like him bent over, and my head is like in his butt, right? And they're shooting pictures. And yeah, he had a sore right in there that we had to patch up. So I'm like trying to bandage it up as best I can and stuff, and everyone's just laughing. I'm like, dude, you guys are killing me here. So
right.
That was pretty funny, so that was a good time. Sean Hamlin was another one at Glen Helen. He fell off the back of the bike and he got sucked up in the rear wheel, and it tore his nutsack open. So he came in after the first moto, and yeah, sure enough, he had like, maybe like a centimeter, it was a pretty good laceration. And we're like, yeah, we're going to have to suture that up. But he didn't have time. Like, he didn't want to go through that. So we just steri-stripped it. We just laid a bunch of strips on his nuts, and he went out and rode the second moto, and then he came back and Doc sewed him up. So that was pretty wild. What else? Don Maeda from he was shooting photos at Hangtown, and he was stepping over one of the hay bales on the start line, and he slipped and kind of fell onto the hay bale, and he just thought that he racked his nuts, right?
Yeah.
So he came to the truck. He's like, dude, I racked my nuts, but the pain's just not going away. And I guess he took a look and he saw some blood, so he was freaking out. So he came in, and Bodner and I have him in the back, and he's like got his legs open, and Bodner pulls out a splinter. It was probably like 3 inches long from his sack. And he's like, if this was a little splinter, I'd be like, hey, good to go. But that's pretty far in there. You need to go to the hospital and get yourself ultrasound, because you could have done some damage up in there.
Yeah.
So yeah, we give him some ribbon for that. That was
brutal.
Funny.
I remember it was my second race in Dallas. I was with you, and I'm still kind of starstruck on all this stuff, right? Because I've looked up to all these guys, and there was a very I don't know if you'd appreciate me telling this, but so there was a very prominent racer who we all know that had the number 2 on his bike for a very long time. Won like 7 Supercross championships or something. You might know him. But I remember and this is the old rig, right? This isn't the 18-wheeler. It's the 5th wheel that you're talking about. And he's laying on that front gurney in there, and he's just laughing, cutting up, and he's got an IV hooked up. And I'm walking in with my backpack, and I'm like, holy shit, he's right there. He's just, shooting the shit with everybody. And I'm like, hi. And he's like, hey, what's up, man? And I'm like, well, what are you doing? He's like, I drank too much last night, so Bodner's hooking me up. And I was like, oh, cool. And just seeing that, the personal side of somebody, just not a racer. And then I'm like, oh shit, like he's just a normal dude getting drunk and having fun with his buddies. And I was like,
yeah, that was a little, yeah. So when I got in at the very beginning, we still had Friday practices for Supercross,
yeah,
and then racing. So it wasn't uncommon for the guys to go practice on Friday and then just go and party. So this was like the tail end of that whole group, per se, that I don't want to say that generation, but that class, right? Of those guys that would go and just practice Friday, party Friday night, and just come Saturday morning, some guys were, still feeling pretty good from the night before, and then be able to perform. And that was the thing that really amazed me, was to watch these guys go out there and just crush it. And I was thinking, there's guys like me, right, that eating right, sleeping, getting all the right, everything's right, trying to get everything perfect so you can be at your optimum. And guys are rolling in, still maybe a little hungover, or definitely, a little tired, and just be able to flip that switch for that night show and just crush it. It's just like, these guys are unnatural. So
we've come so far, right? Because now, I mean, I don't know if you saw today with, Ping said it, and then Racer X just followed up on it about Roxanne and the whole PED and the drug test stuff. And so everybody's throwing a fit about it. But meanwhile, I mean, it wasn't 15 years ago that guys were showing up drunk and then throwing their leg over a motorcycle. And
right. Yeah, no, I did read that. Yeah, that was pretty crazy. But yeah, just watching, the last 20 plus years of the sport, and how it has changed from that to Carmichael coming in and him doing a little bit more than the previous guy, than McGrath and stuff, and training. And so people had to adjust to that, thinking, okay, that's what it takes to win. And then from Carmichael, the next person that really kind of changed, I mean, Stewart changed the riding approach and stuff, but from, Dungy, I think, was the guy that really upped the training component, like how much emphasis went into the off season stuff, right? The preparation physically, not so much on the bike. So I think him working with Alden and just being very methodical about putting those things together. That was like the next change, was through him. And then it just it stepped up a little bit more, but I think it's kind of plateaued a little bit, as far as the preparation goes. I think now, and I've pushed this too with the guys, and it's happening a little bit, but it's difficult just because of the season, the recovery part. Right. Everybody puts in the work. They're not afraid to put the work in. I mean, I've seen, people get burnt out because they do too much work, right? And trying to really get them to understand the recovery part, and that's been hard for them to grasp a hold of. But I think we're seeing that a little bit now. The importance of that. They're not putting as many hours in riding the dirt bike. It's more quality now versus quantity. We're having more guys like Morris and Tedesco and those guys that were at the top of the game. They're now putting time on the bike, prepping it for the rider. So the riders don't have to do much of that riding. Okay. And they can get those settings pretty close to what the riders want. And so they're not having to make as much adjustments to the bike. So that's less time on the bike. Also, they're making sure that the testing, they still test a lot, which is really crazy, because it takes such a lot out of you. But I think even that is a little less, because guys that are going the test guys are doing more. And I think the bikes, I'm not a mechanic, but I just think Kevin Windham said this, one time. He's like, we don't need more power, right? We need usable power. So more time is now spent on the handling of the bike, making usable power. And so I don't think guys are pounding a lot of laps like they used to, testing motors and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I think that's helped, but still, I think more can be done on that and the recovery part.
I think we're just scratching the surface on what you said, the aspect of quality training over quantity. Because I think especially some of these amateur kids, they see the Dungies of the world, and they see these guys that are just crushing it and doing, 100-mile bike rides, and then 4 motos a day, and they don't understand what they're doing to their body from a long-term perspective. And that's why people got out of the sport at 25 years old.
Right. Yeah. I know that Sleater, he started the Orange Brigade program at KTM some time ago. And I think that was really cool, because he took a concept that you see in stick and ball sports, right? You have club teams, or you have teams that they have organized practices, right? They have coaches, and they have people that are available to them to progress them. So he really tried to do that with that program. They were hitting all the regular nationals, so it wasn't perfect, but he was able to kind of rein them in a little bit, and all of them had to be on the same page and doing, being accountable for stuff. And he was there he tried the best that he could to even communicate with the parents. Hey, let's take it easy. I know your son got hurt. He's not fired. Well, he can stay on the team.
Right.
Because a lot of times, parents like, well, you got to keep riding because you're going to lose your ride.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
And that was true for a long time. And I mean, it still is true to this day. I know, even at the professional level, they're always scared that if they don't ride, they'll lose their job. And I know that contracts are sometimes just written that way as well. And it kind of sucks, but there has been some progress. I know Sleater did that. And then they also have now some of these other places that are doing, like Star Racing. I know they were doing some stuff with their amateur team. So it is going in the right direction. Is it perfect? No, but it's hopefully a little better than it was in the past.
Yeah, I think it's going to get there. What do you see? We've talked about this a lot, you and I personally, as we were going through everything. And where do you see healthcare going forward in our industry? Do you see it where these guys are just going to continue to get their man friends and listen to bro science, or do you think there's an avenue for more athletic trainers to be utilized in the sport like in a more corrected way?
No, I've preached this from the beginning. Let's just start with health insurance, right? It boggles my mind when these riders, they have no problem spending $500 or $600 on a pipe and silencer.
Yep. But
they had an HMO or no insurance at all. And it's like, what are you doing?
Right.
Like even myself, I try to get the best insurance that I can afford. Right. And if I didn't have a PPO for some reason, monetary wise or not, then I'm going to tone down my stuff on the bike, right. Or snowboarding or whatever. Cause if I break something, it's going to cost me an arm and a leg. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we made some strides in there, trying to get that out to those guys and the importance of having good health care, but it can be expensive, right? Because if you start racking up some of those injuries, your insurance rates are going to go up, and sometimes that's cost prohibitive. But that could be addressed. Okay, that could totally be addressed. And I know we've talked about this many times. The word union, right, for the riders. Yeah. That's been a thing since even before I came into the industry, right? And it's always, for some reason, gets shot down. And I don't understand why, but that would definitely help out a lot, because if you had an entity that for the riders, okay. And I don't know how it would exactly work out, because they make these riders independent contractors.
Right.
But I'm sure there's a way to do it, right? It takes effort on all parts to make it happen. But if you had some type of organization, because I'll tell you a story. So when we started the concussion program, mm-hmm. and we were trying to find funding for the program, I ran across a program, Great Western Bank, was the bank at the time. They had a program for high schools where they would charge, it was an insurance program, right? And it was $10. An athlete had to pay $10, right? And it was just for concussions, anything related to concussions, right? From the ambulance to the post-concussion care, the neurology tests, all that stuff, right, was covered 100%. Wow. There was no deductible, nothing. It was $10, okay? And so I called and I was like, hey, how does this work? Like, how are you doing this, right? Yeah. And the guy that ran the program, the guy that put the program together, I talked to that guy, and he's like, it's a numbers thing, right? I just need X amount of numbers in the pool so that it's a win-win for everybody, right? Mm-hmm. And he's like, how many guys do you have? And so I just did some real simple math, and I'm like, you know what? I go, at any given time, we have maybe 300 riders in this pool of professional athletes that would go up to a race, mm-hmm. Okay. Not saying all of them show up at one race, but you have a pool, right? That at any given time they're at the race. Yeah. And he's like, okay, well, we're 300 riders. It's going to cost you $50 a rider. Mm-hmm. $50 will cover their concussion care. So we're impact testing, seeing a doctor, ambulance, everything, right?
The drop in the ocean.
I was like, what?
The drop in the ocean, man.
Yeah, right. And I was like, dude, done. I told the guy, I'm like, dude, you know what? We're in. I can sell this, no problem. I mean, even if it meant raising license $50, right?
Right.
Like what? I mean, let's do it. So I went to Bodner, I went to Prater, and I went to all, and I presented this, right? And I said, but here is the thing, right? This is the only stipulation to this, right? Is that we have to know who those 300 riders are at the beginning of the season, and you can't let anybody else in once the season starts. Because that's how the insurance program is written, right?
Uh-huh.
So in high school, they have all the high school football players, they get signed up, and you don't have guys coming in halfway through the season.
Right.
Yeah, I want to play football. Okay, yeah, let Johnny in for football. No, you have a roster at the beginning, and that's your roster, right? And as soon as I mentioned that, they're like, no, can't do it.
Right.
And I was like, why not? I go, just say, let's say it's 500 and we only have 300. Big deal. We just say we had 300 this year, so it might be $50. If we have more, you just can't have guys rolling up. So the problem was the amateurs that move up, right, or that come in, let's say a kid, he gets his pro license, somewhere, and he wants to just race one national, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that was the other thing too. The guy's like, how many races did they race? What's the season? And I was telling him all that. He's like, yeah, okay, so this is what it's going to be, right? And you have those guys that only race that one national a year, right? That's their little hometown race, and they do that. Well, if that guy signs up in December, right? If he buys his pro license, he doesn't have to register for his race until that comes around, but he's in the pool, right?
Right.
But we needed to know who that was. And that would eliminate those kids from Loretta's jumping up into the national scene. Remember how, they would do that, right?
Yeah.
That would take those guys out. They wouldn't be able to do it because you can only have a cutoff. So they're just like, nope, can't do it. So I was like, all right. And I think too is you start to realize like, man, there's some power in numbers, right? Like if 300 guys would bring that down to $50, like what could you do with other stuff, right?
Right.
Like, could you technically have some type of health insurance, right? If we had 300 guys that were in a pool, what would that look like for a specialized health insurance plan? Like you would at a business, right?
Yep.
I think you could bring the cost down somewhat or offset the cost. Like let's say the riders get together and like, hey, you know what? We'll pay 50% of our health care and the team has to pick up the other 50%.
Right.
Or
maybe, or put into the pool everybody with an AMA card that covers amateurs and pros alike,
Yeah. Or yeah, you could do that too. You could do that. I mean, I don't know. There's obviously some, some stuff that would maybe not allow that to happen, but I was like, I think the higher ups saw that as like, well, if they're getting healthcare and they have power in numbers, what else are they going to ask for?
Yeah.
If they're collectively getting together and they can see how being together as a group helps out, what's to say they can't do, some other stuff. That was never mentioned. I'm only assuming, but when they were that quick to say, nope, can't do it. I was like, wow. So okay, now what are you going to do? Right. Yeah. So then just to finish up that part, just to kind of tell you how the industry operates. So at the time we were working on that concussion program, and Dr. Ryman and I were putting it together because we kind of saw what was happening in other sports and we were trying to get ahead of it. We were looking at these lawsuits and stuff, and we're like, hey, we got to do something, all it takes is one smart lawyer to say, hey, I can get you guys some money. Right. And then that's going to be tough. So, we started working on this concussion program and we thought we had a pretty good gig. And, Bonner's like, yeah, run with it and see what you can do with it. Right. And I was like, all right, cool. And so we had something together. We wanted to make a test run. We were like, hey, let's just try this out and see how it goes. And we were working on it. And, we wanted to try it out at Supercross and just kind of see how it went. And then out of the blue, AMA is like, hey, we're going to make it mandatory for outdoors. And I was like, wow, these guys they beat us to the punch, right? Like they must have been working on something in the back that I'm curious to see what they're doing. Like, this is crazy. Cause I knew what we went through to try to put together something that would work for our sport. Right.
Right.
And so I was like, well, okay, what's the deal? So I told Bodner and Tom, like, hey, we got to find out what these guys are doing. So we went to them and like, hey, what's your guys' program? And they're like, oh, we're going to run with your program. I was like, okay. But that costs money. And Roy Jansen, he's told me, he's like, hey, whatever it takes, just make it happen. We got to have this up and running. So just let me know what it costs, whatever it takes. Let's go. I'm like, all right, cool. So we went to work, and I was like, this is my opportunity to start making a career out of being in the motocross industry here. This,
Right.
I'm not saying I'm going to make a living off of this program, but at least I can make something happen, with this program. So I went to Dr. Ryman, and we got it all together. And I said, hey, I'm going to take a little bit of money out of this and put it in my pocket as like a part-time gig, right? Plus the stuff that I'm doing with Moto already. It's going to start looking pretty good. And then we can hopefully expand on it and maybe make it a full-time gig, right?
Yeah.
And he was all about it. He's fully supportive. So we came up with a number. It was like $52,000 for the year.
Yeah.
For the entire program, from me, Dr. Ryman, the concussion testing. We also had to have a license for this. It's a group that monitors the tests when you take it online. Mm-hmm. We had to license that. Colleges use it for when they do their testing.
Make sure you're not cheating and stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. So Ryman's like, yeah, that's reasonable. I mean, it's $52,000 for an athletic trainer, to hire them full time and then do a program, all that. So yeah, for sure, it's totally reasonable. So I went to Jansen and I'm like, hey, it's $52,000, and they're like, what? Like, he flipped out. He's like, what are you like? Are you serious? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, what? I mean, what were you expecting? Like, what did you think it was going to cost? Like, we're looking at like $5,000, maybe $10,000. And I was like, that's how much the licensing is for this test. Like, that's insane. Like, how could you think it's that much when you run a business that handles much higher costs of stuff, right? Like, this should be nothing to you. And I was like, all right, well, then I guess we're not doing it. I was like, when he said, hey, we can't do it, that's too much. I'm like, all right, cool. Then I guess you guys aren't doing it. And so then Bodner calls me. He's like, hey, we got to make this work. And I'm like, no, the guy doesn't want to pay. This is Dr. Ryman and I, this is it. This is the bare bones program. I mean, it should be more.
Right.
And he's like, well, we got to make it work. And I'm like, we can't do it. So he calls me and he's like, hey, we need to meet up. So we went to a Denny's out where he lives. And he's like, hey, we have to make this work. And I'm like, well, how are we going to make it work? And he's like, well, figure it out. We got to do it. But we have to make this work. So I said, okay, look, I think if we take this and this out and this out, it came down to where they were going to, the licensing was going to be covered and that stuff. And then I was going to make $200 extra a month for running the program, which was like nothing.
Right.
I felt like I was going back to like the whole Buckaloo thing.
Yep.
And looking back at that, and I think I don't know if this is the same for all healthcare workers, but you wear your heart on your sleeve and you think about the people that you are taking care of, in this case, the riders, right? And you put them in the front, like you put them first.
Yeah.
And so at that moment, I could have just walked away. They weren't going to, if I walked away, I'm not doing it. If they still want to find somebody else to do it, they can do it, but they weren't going to find someone to do it for $200 a month.
No.
And I knew that, right? But again, Bonner's like, hey, you got to do this. He's telling me like the team thing, we'll eventually get you squared away. We'll get that money for you. At the next year, we'll ask for more money. We'll get it for you, but we got to do it. And so I was like, all right, I buckled. And as a businessman, I suck. I mean, you run a business, right? You got to deal with that. And I had a business too. Like, I was doing some training at the time, right? And I just look back, I'm like, I'm a crappy businessman. Like, I should have just stood my ground, and they would have had to buckle. Like, they would have had to find that money if they wanted to start it. And I think, they say when you're negotiating, you should negotiate from a position of power, right? And I learned all this after the fact, right? Yeah. And I should have just held my ground, and I should be willing. That's another thing. What other people tell you, business people tell you, is like, you have to be willing to walk away, right? When you're negotiating something, you want something, right? But you got to be willing to walk away from it.
1,000%.
Yeah. And I wasn't willing to walk away from it, because that meant maybe they would have said, hey, you're done with Moto. We'll find another Eddie, right? There's plenty of them out there, So I was worried about that. But more importantly, I was just like, I care for the guys on the track more than I want to say I care for myself, right?
Yeah.
So I did. I said, all right, we'll do it. We'll do it. So we were doing it, for bare bones. Like, it was nothing. right?
Yeah.
So that, that got the concussion program. And at the time, I would say that program was as good, if not better than anything else that was out there, collegiate wise, professional wise. And I say that because so when you're on a team like the NFL, that team itself is just responsible for those athletes, right? And then, the NFL has its union and you got to report to them, but the testing and everything can be done in-house.
Right.
We had to find ways to have people test all over the country and all over the world. Because I had guys calling me from France going, hey, I'm going to come race, this Supercross. I got to do the impact test.
Right.
So they had to do it in their language, right? And we had to set that all up. So we had to figure out how to do that. And then not only that, but then in the event that one of them gets injured, we got to be able to find where they can get that follow-up care. So I'm on the phone calling clinics and explaining to them that what a motocross rider is, and they're going to pay you cash and this kind of stuff. And then calling doctors to get, that care. So there was a lot involved in that program that you didn't really see on the front end. Right.
Sure.
But we made it happen. It was cool, and then
and that personal attention to detail, you can't get that. You're not going to get that in a ball and stick sport. I mean, where you have the director of the entire protocol, you have their cell phone number, and you're going to text them around the world. That just doesn't happen.
Yeah. So that brings me to a story. So this testing, right? So if you can't come to an office and take the test, you can do it online, right? So basically what happens is you go to this website, your camera comes on, and there's a guy on the other end of the camera watching you take this impact test.
Mm-hmm.
And he's there just to make sure it's you taking the test and not somebody else, right? So then when you're done with the test, it's over, camera shuts off, and you go about your business. I get an email that says, hey, test was done. I check it, make sure that it's right, and we're good to go. The guy gets a clearance, he gets his pro license, or he gets to race, right? So this thing's working pretty good. There's some kinks here and there, but for the most part, it's pretty awesome. And then I get a phone call. I get an email. You gotta call me back. And then I get this phone call with an urgent, you need to call me ASAP. We have a situation. And I'm like, dude, what is going on? So I call this company, and the guy's like, hey, this is a first for us. We've never had this before. We don't know how to proceed. We're talking to our attorneys, and we got to figure out if there's anything that's been, illegal or anything like that. And I'm like, what the heck?
Right.
So I'm like, all right, dude, tell me, hit me with it. What's going on? He's like, well, one of our clients, one of your athletes signed up to take the test. He did his test, but he forgot to log out. So the camera guy is just watching. Like, he doesn't log out.
Yeah.
The athlete has to log out. So he's just sitting there watching. So this athlete goes and starts getting it on with his chick.
Oh, no.
In front of the camera. And he doesn't know, right? He's in his bedroom. So the camera is right there on his desk, but the camera is facing his bed. And he's just getting after it. And this poor sap on the other end of the camera is watching the whole thing. Because there's parameters, right? Like, when you set up the test, if the guy's hands go below the keyboard, the computer shuts off or the camera shuts off. I took all those out. I'm like, I don't need any of that. I just need to make sure the guy that says he's doing the test is taking the test.
Yeah.
So the dude's like, all right, then it's going. It's going this whole time. Nothing's shutting the computer off.
He went for extra credit, it seemed.
So I'm like, I just started laughing, right? Because we're moto, right? We think that's funny.
Right.
And the guy on the other end is freaking out. He's like, hey, this is serious, man. This is pornography. I'm like, yeah, for sure. This is cool. I can't wait to tell everybody back. I'm looking at this is hilarious.
Right.
And he's literally freaking out. He's like, there's like all these regulations that we just broke and this and that. I'm like, all right, here's the deal. What do we do? And he's like, well, I can delete the file. And I was like, all right, well, let's do that.
Easy.
Right? Let's delete the file. So I'll tell you what, let me talk to my medical director. All right, let's see what he wants to do. He's a doctor. We understand all these procedures more than I do. And we'll check it out. We'll see what happens. So I call Bodner and I tell him what happened. He starts laughing. Right. He's thinking the same way I do, right? He's like cracking up, like, who is this? Who? Oh my gosh. And then I tell Carson, and we're like, so what do we do? Do we go to riders meeting and just play the video, and call this guy out? And so we ended up, we told the guy just delete the video, no big deal. So I was at riders meeting. I think it was Anaheim, one of the Anaheims, and we're having the riders meeting. And I was like, hey, you know, we had a situation, and I'm trying not to look at the guy.
Yeah.
Right. I'm trying not, because I'm saying this and I'm like, my eyes are, so I'm really trying to like just look around. Right. So I don't want to make eye contact with this guy. And he knows who he is after I started talking. I'm like, hey, you got to make sure when you take this impact test, when you're done, you log out. Right. We had an incident, and I started telling him this whole thing about how this guy was like getting it on and blah, blah, blah. And everyone's like, what? Who is it? Who is it? Like, we can't say HIPAA violation, you know? And they're like, what? And I have my eyes down like this, and I'm just like cracking up. So yeah, that was
Oh, that's
fun.
great, man. So, all right. I want to respect your time. I see your lovely wife hanging out in the back. She's probably like in the corner.
No, we're good. We're good.
Well, tell me one, before I let you go, tell me one good story about this guy right here from this.
Does it have to be a motocross story?
I don't care, dude.
No. Man, I don't know.
Can we talk about the hair for a second? I mean,
dude, that guy's hair was always on point, you know,
and it's picture perfect.
Yeah, for sure. That guy, he's a solid dude. He used to get his hair done, I think, by Lonnie at Harry's Situation, and his girlfriend and, you know, now wife, she became a hairstylist, so she put a stop to that. Right?
Oh yeah, cut it off.
But no, what is it? We have some stories. Holy cow! Let's see, where do we go? Well, one of them, I remember this guy. So we would go to the track when he was riding for KTM. And I would go to his house, and we drive out to the track. And every time, right on the button, he would get suited up, get ready to go, right? Helmet on and everything. And then he would take his bike stand and go out into the field and take a dump. Like every time. It was like, you gotta take your dump, taking my dump. Like he would just go out there and just pop a squat, come back, you know, and then boom, done. I mean, go ride the rest of the day. I'm like, why don't you do that in the morning when you get up? He's like, no, it comes on, you know, when I get all my stuff on. I'm like, dude, you're killing me. You know,
don't we have like rattlesnakes to worry about out there and stuff? Like,
right? So somewhere out there at the KTM track, there's a bunch of landmines because of this guy. You know,
but for those not watching and you're just listening on a podcast, I have a lovely picture of Eddie with founder of Whiskey Throttle, David Pingree, while he is. I guess what was this? This was I mean, he just came to hang out as a paramedic, right? On the Asterisk rig.
Well, he wasn't even a paramedic then. He was considering that job. I think he was in the paramedics, or no, he was in anatomy and physiology with Dostal, I think, at this time.
Okay.
And I remember he was in the rig, and I'm like, hey, you want to practice some IVs? Because you're gonna have to do this when you go to medic school. And he's like, you sure? He's like, yeah, dude, drop a line in. So I laid down. I was the guinea pig. I'm like, yeah, let's just walk you through it. And he was like, no way. He's like, okay. And he's like super nervous. And so like, dude, I'm like trying to be calm, right? Because if I'm nervous, he's going to be nervous. So I'm like, yeah, just, who cares if you jab me? I'm not going to die, And no, he got it. First stick, he was pretty good. So he said it helped him out. When he went to school for paramedic school, he'd already experienced that. So he wasn't freaking out like some of the other students. So it was good.
I love it.
Yeah, it was good for him. What else? Like, gosh, there was a time, avid surfer, right? He loves to surf.
Yeah.
And we were out Oceanside, and for those of you that maybe don't know Ping very well, he's got a unique physique, right? He's not the most, I would say, he doesn't have a six pack. He doesn't have the broad shoulders. He tends to have like a little pudge, right? And you put him in a wetsuit, and he looks like a little seal, right? You can't. No, he looks like a seal, right? And so we were out there paddling out, and he was ahead of me a little bit, and he's paddling, and all of a sudden a seal or a sea lion seal pops up out of the water. And I mean, you can see the whiskers, you can see the eyes, and he's maybe a foot away from his face. And now we're stopped in the ocean. And I'm right behind him, like to his left. And Ping's like, what do I do? What do I do, Eddie? And I'm like, I think it wants to mate you. I think this guy thinks you're one attractive sea lion, And he's like, stop messing around. I'm like, I don't know, dude. Look at those eyes. And he's freaking out. And so it just looks at him, and then it like swims away, and we just go out surfing. But he was freaking out. Like this thing was, I was like, dude, it's gonna mount you, man. It's gonna try to have some fun with you. So
I love it.
It was really funny.
Well, dude, we got to do this again. There's so much more stuff
Oh
we got to
yeah,
talk about. Like,
a lot more,
yeah.
lot of good stuff. I could tell you like stories. Like you wanted stories like the Ron and if you guys remember, rest in peace, Ivan, One Punch, Tyler Evans, One Punch. Let's end with that one.
I like
So
that. I like
I
that.
think it was Minneapolis, the old stadium with the airlock and stuff, and Tyler had gotten food poisoning. So he was like laid up in the truck on IV trying to get hydrated, but he was out. Like he was not feeling good. He couldn't move.
Yeah.
And then Ron had gotten a concussion. So we brought him in. So we're keeping him in there for observation. And Ron's just laying on the gurney and Tyler's over there just like, like all bubble guts and everything. And so Ron's like, oh, hey, One Punch. And he's like, yeah. And he's like, you ain't so tough. Look at you. You ain't so tough. And Tyler's like, I'm going to kick your ass. He's like, go ahead. And he couldn't because he was laid up, right? He was so
Right.
he was so out. And Ron, his concussion, he was just talking so much trash to Tyler. And I was like, Ron, dude, you have a concussion. You're not going to remember any of this. He's going to remember everything.
Everything.
And he's like, oh, he's not so tough. Look at him. He's soft. He's super nice. I'm like, all right. And Tyler wanted to kick his ass in the truck, but he couldn't because he was just laid up. He had no power. Like
Right.
he was nothing. I was hysterical. So awesome.
That's great, man. That's great. Well, many more to come on episode 2 because
let's do it.
A lot more.
Episode 3, 4, I don't care. However, 6 guys. Hey, tell you what, if those 6 people that are listening, if they want to hear some more, just have them chime in, write in, do whatever, and go. We want to hear some more stories.
I'd love it. Yeah. Hey, do you mind if I put up your email address? Let them contact you if they have questions for you, or do you want? You have a way to do that, or?
I mean, I'm always willing to talk. I'm out here in Italy. It might take a little bit to get back to them. But yeah, no problem. Yeah.
If anybody wants to contact Eddie, it's right there out in the ether, so you can check it out.
Unless I owe you money or something like that. I got euros, or I get
right. I mean, conversions, and who wants to do that? So, no good. Thanks, bro. I appreciate you coming on. It's good to catch up with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Dude, I love it. When you asked me to be on, I was like, man, it's bringing back some memories, from the time that I was in, and it was great to be able to bring some of those back. And hey, if the audience wants another show, I'm more than happy to give them another one, and we can go into more stories. I got plenty of them. Right.
I love it. All right, man. Well, all right, folks. Crash Cart signing off. Thanks a lot. We'll see you soon.
Thank you. Cool.